Hey folks, a quick word before we get started on the episode. So, I was talking to Ian during the interview, but we had a lot of problems with the connection, and it was pretty bad at certain points, which meant that I often had to wait for the whole sound to come through and the video to come through and so on, so I could actually hear what Ian was saying and vice versa. So often there was this kind of awkward pause in the conversation, or there was some overlap when we were talking across each other by accident that way. So as a result, I had to edit this video and this podcast, and especially if you watch the video version, you should notice that there will be various cuts that you will notice that happen. If you listen to audio only, it should be a little bit smoother. There's still some minor issues that I noticed after finishing all the editing process, but it's so much better than what it was. So despite all that, I hope that you can still enjoy this episode, but I wanted to give fair warning because typically I do not edit the conversations at all, meaning I want them to be the way they are as we have them, my guests and I, so that you can just have an unfiltered and unedited version. This time I decided to actually do that. And the main thing that I did was in the service provider that I use to do the remote recordings called Descript, which is only possible thanks to my patrons. So blatant plug to join my Patreon site at patreon.com/Demeere. Link is in the show notes. As always, it's the support that makes it happen, and Descript allows me to do very specific AI-driven edits in the sense that it detects automatically when there's a long pause and it can shorten it. And it's things like that. So content-wise, nothing has changed. The only thing that has changed is that just the boring parts where nobody says anything or where it's just a mumbled, jumbled mess of us talking across each other that we then detected as well and then stopped talking and then resumed the conversation. That stuff is gone. So I think transparency is the best option, as always, especially in the times that we live in. So that's why I wanted to explain this before you start listening to the actual episode. That said, let's go.
Anyway, so we're getting back into the rolling start, as I explained before. I don't no longer do introductions. We've talked many times before, and so people either if they don't know who you are, well, that's really bad. They should be ashamed of themselves. And also, I always recommend people listen to our previous conversations. Ian and I have talked a bunch of times, done some crossover podcasts and so on. So lots of fun. We haven't talked in a while because lots of stuff has been going on, in our personal lives and busy work and so on. But we connected recently again and thought, well, this is a good idea. Let's have another chat. And we don't really have much scripted or anything other than some vague ideas. I do have a bunch of questions from my patrons that will go into the bonus segment. But I have a few from some of your followers as well that we might do in the main segment as well. So before we get started, anything you
Not
want to share,
particularly, I'm
Ian?
glad we're here after my technical incompetence.
Yeah, we had a bunch of technical issues. I'm gonna shoot the first question at you. That one's from your end. It's from Will Hayes, and he wants to know what gloves you use because he's looking to get some, but wants some with decent open fingers for grabbing, clinching, and striking. We usually spar gloveless, but most of us, there's always one. Well, don't do anything other than light head contact. Do you use MMA gloves
Well,
or
and
something
I think
specific?
you've always got to have the right kind of gloves for the kind of sparring you do. That's the point. So in our training, we do like a more holistic form of sparring than maybe a lot of karate can do. So we do allow, gripping, striking, throwing the clinch, throwing, all that kind of stuff. So the MMA gloves are ideal. We tend to avoid the ones that are really hard, mainly more designed to protect knuckles. So the MMA sparring gloves that have got a decent padding at the front are the ones that we tend to favour. But I'll be honest, I normally just leave the choice of the glove up to the student as well. They've all got their own little preferences and what they like to use. So long as they allow gripping, some kind of wrist securing so they don't come off when they're getting caught under arms and stuff. And so long as they've got sufficient padding, then, I'm good. But the MMA style sparring gloves is the ones that we normally use.
Yeah, they've come a long way. I mean, I think they've gotten pretty good. You don't have to buy the most expensive ones, but there's some really good stuff out there that, uh, like you said, you can do the grappling, you can grab and so on, and still have a decent amount of padding. Also with the newer materials that they use for the padding, it used to be, I mean, just total crap like many years ago, and now it actually does a fair amount of cushioning, especially with the good ones. If you buy something cheap from some Chinese website, maybe not so much, but other than that, that should be good. All right. Next question is from Heidi Jones, and she has a couple questions about a conversation about your teaching at her club this evening due to you holding a course in Shropshire.
Close enough.
Am I
Shropshire.
pronouncing that right?
Well, they'll tell me I'm saying it wrong. It was a
Shropshire.
northerner, but
Okay.
whatever.
When I see Shire,
Yeah,
I
but it
want
was
to
the
make a lot of
same.
the
I'm
Rings
not from
jokes,
the
but I'm
land.
not
I'm
gonna.
up north. We're all Thwaites and Wicks. Shires is a southern thing.
Okay. Anyway, she's interested to know about the original Japanese
I know what that
letter
means.
translations.
No,
Okay.
I
I don't
saw
know
that
what.
one, and it took me a
Go
second
ahead.
to realize what she was asking about. But there was a
Okay.
1908 letter written by Anko Itosu, one of the great Okinawan masters, huge influence on karate. And he wrote a letter in 1908 to say what his view of the future of karate should be and how it should be taught to schools, essentially because it would be good for the military. The Japanese military at that time is trying to rapidly expand. They realize they're out of date when it comes to what the West are doing. And they're going to copy that Western model of getting youth engaged in sport. So they've got healthy young recruits. So essentially, Itosu wrote a letter, and it's quite an interesting letter because it tells us about the karate of his time and how it's about to change, what it's about to become. So historically, it's quite important. And there's a book called Karate Do Taikan, which was published in the 1930s, which has photographs of the original handwritten letter. And while there's lots of translations out there, I didn't particularly trust any of them. So what I did was I got the scans of that from that book. And this is really before the internet. I got this done a long time ago. And then what I did was I sent them to a translation company and said, okay, translate this. And they wrote back to, we can't, because it's not modern Japanese. It's kind of the Okinawan kind of dialect type stuff, and it's older. And so I wrote back saying, well, can you try and find me someone who could, because you stand a better chance than me. Eventually they got back, yeah, no, there's a specialist firm that we can put you into. They can do it. So I think it cost me way back then, it was about £300, which came back with 2 sides of A4 paper, which is free on my website if anyone wants to see. So that's when I got it translated, and there's some really interesting things in that. And I did want to get translated by a non-martial artist, because I've seen other translations and you can't help but superimpose your own view on things as you translate. So I wanted one done by someone who wasn't a martial artist, just to know literally what does it say, and your best approximation of that into English. So there's some very interesting things in there. Like, for example, he's very clear that the karate of that time is not for, he says karate is not intended to be used against a single adversary. It's a method of avoiding injury should one by chance be confronted by a villain or rupee. So there's things like that, which I think is a really important sentence. So he's saying the karate at his time is not for a consensual exchange with a fellow martial artist. It's more for civilian self-defense style altercations, which obviously has an impact on the kind of things we see within that traditional framework. We don't see the skills for out-dueling a fellow karateka more than we see the, as it also puts it, the methods for dealing with villains are up. So that's what he's referring to it. And yeah, I got that, and I haven't paid
Okay.
£300 to get it
Okay.
translated in 1990s money. It's up there. It's all been remembered. So I quoted the Learned Seminar.
Okay. There's actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's around that time from the letter, but it could be 1910s or 20s. I'm not sure anymore. But there was the Chinese military was working together with the Russian military, and there was this. I think it was either a letter or a report, I don't remember, or a quote from like a Chinese general or something, when they had one of the Russian instructors doing hand-to-hand combat and that kind of stuff, and he was like, "We don't have anything as good as that." and he was doing like, wrestling and boxing, if I'm not mistaken. And then the Chinese said like, we don't have anything this is much better than our stuff. And there was a lot of, obviously, influence from military, from Western military towards the East, towards China all of a sudden, that it was like, but no, we know Kung Fu is like, martial art, and we didn't have anything like that. Well, actually, we also had some stuff that they were very interested in. And this is always funny when we talk about, in the West, we have this idea of Asian martial arts, like, oh my God, this is so, in depth and this and that, as if there was nothing here, as if in Europe, there was not like millennia of fighting that happened in all different ways, different kinds, and so on. And for sure, nobody knew in the early 1900s how to do that anymore, because the wars had stopped. Nobody fought anymore, right? It's, typically when your life is on the line, you want to do something that works, and you are very motivated to learn from somebody who actually does that stuff also, especially if they do it for a living. Like, okay, this is what I do to survive. I'd like to learn from you. And it's to this interconnection between East and West and so on.
No, I
Anyway,
think
I'm
it's
off
a
on
good
a
one though.
tangent, but
It's a lot stronger
it's
than
funny when you
people
mention that letter.
realize, I think. So that for the Japanese martial arts, that Meiji Restoration thing, where fighting with a bow and arrow on a battlefield is no longer valued. But having people who are like a lot of the karate stuff we do, like lining up by rank, and before I mean, that's all because they wanted the youth to get ready for military service. It wasn't something they did originally, and the idea that you
Yep.
can do it for exercise and discipline, and if you can, on a modern battlefield, you fire a gun, you fire shells, you don't necessarily charge towards them with a sword. So there was that shift in, well, what are the martial arts valued for? And certainly with karate, and you've got to look at its development within that context. Otherwise, you miss why they made the changes they did to make sure it survived and remained popular. So, but again, in that letter, Itosu quotes, it's Nelson saying that, today's battle was won on the playing fields of Eton. So he's making reference to the way the English education system was producing young recruits for military service. So a lot of that Do idea or that Buddhification of the Japanese martial arts, they were copying what was happening in English schools for that. So we tend to think of the martial art, like as you were saying, originating in the East and then traveling. Well, there was a lot more back and forth than I think that most people appreciate at first sight.
Yeah, and this was true, throughout history, because the Europeans tended to colonize all over the world, and a colonizing force tends to be either competent at combat, or it doesn't survive, or doesn't get to colonize much, because typically the natives are not really all that happy to be colonized. So violence is kind of part of the deal, and either you could fight or you couldn't, and then you died. So, I mean, a good example of that is in the Philippines. The influence of in particular, the Southern European fencing and so on, and sword work and what have you, that influenced what the locals were doing. Because, I mean, if you get conquered by colonizing force, that means that they beat you. They were better at fighting, or more treacherous, or whatever you want to call it, but they beat you. So why would people not learn from, the oppressor, who is basically has had this apparently a superior fighting force? Okay, you learn, you try, and at the minimum, you learn to defend against what they're doing. That's the absolute minimum. And if they tend to have something that works better than you have, then either you incorporate it into whatever you're doing, or you maybe change some stuff that you're doing to adapt to it, and so on. And that process is ongoing. And I was talking about this to somebody a while ago, that they said something about the war in Ukraine. I don't want to get political, but just a point here. And they're like, they said it was pretty simple. And I'm like, no, that this is not how war works. It's a continuous learning process, because the battlefield is different than maybe last time. There's different technology. The conditions are different, and so on. And there's always this adaptation period, like the drone warfare that we should see now in Ukraine is the first time that it's being used in this way in conflict. It hasn't been used before, but it's being used like this. And we literally see people like, okay, what do we do? Well, actually with a shotgun, you can shoot the drone out of the air, is what they say. Okay, let's try that and see what happens. As opposed to, well, I'm going to hide behind a tree, until the drone operator who's sitting like miles away watching a screen with like kind of like a joystick and is trying to get around the tree to get you. And I've seen that footage. This is stuff that happens. So there's always this adaptation, this change, this constant of change, and trying out new tactics, new techniques, and new weapons, and so on. Why would it be any difference in a self-defense situation, or or whether it's hand-to-hand combat and so on, as a civilian or military? As things change, you need to change with it. So I don't think. I mean, I wouldn't think that's a revolutionary thing that I'm saying, but apparently, for some people, it's still
Yeah,
like,
but
what
you
do
know,
you
if,
mean?
like with my art, when you look at karate, it's a fusion of many systems that's evolved over time to fit the culture it's in at that time. But I think a lot of people tend to have the view, or want to have the view, that it arrived in a perfect form, and then any change away from that perfect form is some form of blasphemy. But you're saying as they came into contact with different instructors and different cultures, you know, they were adapting and changing. I mean, when you were talking there, one of the things that I remember reading is Utsuka, the founder of Wadaru Karate, in his book, makes the point about the Westerners at that time, at least, are generally a lot bigger than us. And that's something we need to consider. And he tells a story about, I think it was a judoka fighting with a wrestler, a Western wrestler, who got him in an armbar, like a Jujikatami, like a crosslock. And the wrestler stood up, the Western wrestler stood up and shook him off his arm and went, "It's no contest." So he says, you know, we're going to have to consider this, you know, with people who at that time could be much physically bigger than us. So again, you could see that kind of, you know, that as cultures mix and match, they'll swap ideas and then they'll consider how they have to beat each other and stuff. And ultimately, you get that like ever changing thing. Still see it with the karate today. Now, one of the things I find quite interesting when I talk to my American friends, how they integrate the use of firearms a lot into their karate, like weapon retention and the use of the firearm. Whereas in my country, because guns just aren't a thing, we don't really do that. So even there, you see the kind of, you know, the art continue to evolve for the culture that it's in. Interesting to see where we are in 100 years.
Well, maybe you and I will still be around then in some sort of AI version that we've uploaded our consciousness to the cloud, and that you can talk to us now, whatever remains of our brains in a few years. A buddy of mine said something a while ago about that, and he said, we're all talking about traditional martial arts, and maintain tradition and this and that, and he mentioned that what if the tradition is to change and to adapt? What if that is part of your tradition, instead of making this anachronism that, was from like 100, 200, whatever years ago, but like the lessons that you learned from that, and the system that you inherit, how can you adapt that to, to this day and age? And you've done, I mean, years of work in that regard. And that is the
Skillfully
segue
done.
into Heidi's other question. Thank you, sir. When she asked, how have you translated kata moves the way you have to become so incredibly high regarded?
I mean, yeah, well, the goal has never been to end up. I mean, I'm aware that people like what I do and I have a certain following, but that was never the objective. The objective is you share what you do because I believe it to have value, and then other people have seen it. And they go, "Yeah, we like that as well," and so therefore, it's kind of developed a life of its own over the last 20 years or so. But I think one of the things, the interpretation of the kata is the first place is viewing it in its correct historical context, to understanding why it was created, when it was created. So, for example, we know it's not for let's put our guards up and stand 10 feet away and duel. We don't see that kind of footwork. It's up at close range. I need to blitz this person and get out of dodge. If you understand it in that context, a lot of movements start to make a lot more sense. There's also a lot that we were given historically where the past masters made clear to us, the angle in the kata represents the angle you're attacking the enemy from, which is now widely misunderstood to be that's the angle they're attacking you from. There's that kind of stuff. And if you get these clues and put it all together, the kata starts to speak to you. There's a logic to it. And I think in the seminars, I'll get asked to teach different kata and different things, but I keep coming back to these core principles. This is why I believe this should be trained this way. This is why I believe this movement represents this. And I think the fact that I show my working an awful lot is why people like it, because then they can go, oh, I can see the logic led to this point, and therefore I can take that to play it as well. So it's trying to use that teach people the fish thing rather than he's a fish. So, and I think that's what people tend to kind of resonate with when I'm doing is they can see, okay, yep, I get it. And my favorite thing at seminars is when people say to me is, yeah, that's really obvious now that you pointed out. So I like the fact that when it's shown to me, of course, but they just need someone to kind of piece it together for them.
Yeah, yeah. That's a typical thing. If you look at a lot of the teaching, like yesterday, I was teaching my Tai Chi class again. We were on summer break, so we started again Tai Chi, and then the class after I teach MMA, which a lot of people don't understand why I do both things, but that's okay. And there was a new student, and he'd come to one of my open mat pushing hand sessions, which is kind of like it's open mat for us freestyle. It's competition type pushing hands. Just it's kind of like wrestling, grappling, but with some specifics that are inherent to Tai Chi Chuan. And it's a big guy. He makes me look small. Like he's taller and heavier than I am. I'm not a small guy to begin with. And I think he's a black belt. I forget which style. I think Wado, but I could be something else. And he was very surprised in a similar way that I was very surprised when I first did, my first Tai Chi class many years ago. That because, he was going off balance the whole time and he wasn't used to that. So it's like, okay, in September, I'm going to come to your class. And I'm like, okay, we'll see. Because how many times, I mean, same thing with you, I guess, how many times you heard that? And like, sure. Okay. But he was there first class. I'm like, awesome. And we talked about, a lot of stuff. I gave him the basics and I said, look, there's nothing hidden here. I'm going to give you exactly what you need to get, as far as you need to go if you train hard. There's no secrets. These are the fundamentals of what we do. For instance, like we only do three things. The main thing is we manipulate the spine, and we do three things with that. We'll rotate, we will lever it down or up, and we will raise it or lower it. That's all we do. Done. Now, the way you do that's where the body mechanics get really interesting, but that's all we do. So everything we do, I want you to see that in that, frame of reference. And I said, look, my other student was doing the form. I said, look at him doing the form. I just showed you weight transfer, full stance, back stance. This is what he's doing. Look at his movements. Everything he's doing is full stance, back stance. Then we said we differentiate between stepping and transferring weight. That's two separate things for us. I said, look, now he's stepping. Now he's transferring weight. I just showed you that. So whatever he's doing with his arm is a manifestation of the body mechanics and the principles that I just explained to you. And if you do this really, 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 really well, that's where, the quote unquote secret lies, because that's how you get good, is getting really, really good at these so that you don't have to think about them anymore. And I said, that's why every class, we start with basic stuff, just the basics, like warm up the spine, learn to do rotation and so on. Every single class. I said, oh, that's funny. I just told, I was talking to my sensei last class and I said, look, it's really great to do all these new fancy katas and so on, but maybe we just, do the basics again, because a lot of people seem to have forgotten to do them right because they just moved on to all the advanced stuff. And I'm like, yeah, now we're lucky we don't have a lot of forms. We only have a few. So we get to do them a lot, a lot more than people who have like tons of forms.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. It's one of the reasons that I think certainly in the karate world, people collect the forms. They do too many of them. They should do a smaller number and do those forms of katas really, really well. And I have seen clubs who do that, where they'll get excited by certain elements and then they forget about the fundamentals and it all just falls apart. But you and I have talked about this before, that principle-based teaching and learning is the most effective way to go about things for me.
Changing tacks a little bit because we haven't talked in a while. Big part of that was obviously COVID, and I got a few questions. There's two from my patrons, and I normally save that for the bonus segment, but I was going to ask you about it anyway, so it's a good segue into that part. So Eric Parsons, who says hi, said some questions for Iain. I know that COVID required you to generate new revenue streams as classes and seminars were not allowed for some time. How has that impacted your operations now that things have reopened?
I'm back to normal. It's pretty much as it was prior to the pandemic now. But during it, because I never saw that coming. When the pandemic started to get going and starting to spread and things, I was of the view that, yeah, this will pass quickly. I didn't expect 18 months of no income. So that was something of a big shock. In terms of how did I generate new revenue, I didn't really. It just all stopped. Thankfully, there were some things like my app doesn't rely on being in person with people, so that continued to generate some revenue. But I think there was about 12 months where I didn't knock the heating on in my house. It was just I need to any expense that I can avoid, I need to stop spending. So a small amount of help from the government, not a lot, but enough to help. Like as a lot of self-employed people did. And there was enough revenue from the app to make sure that the lights stayed on until the end of the pandemic. So I always have this thing, there's times in your life where it's about surviving, and then there's other times where it's about thriving. You'll adjust depending on what's required. So that was okay. We're in survival mode now. So it was, yeah, I'll generate what I can. I'll creative meal choices as well.
So, and he also asked, how has that, impacted your operations now that things have reopened? You're doing the exact same thing as before, or have you made some changes overall?
Pretty much. I think the
like
only
lessons
difference
learned from the
is
pandemic,
that
for
I'm
instance?
now aware that everything can stop. So there always needs to be a little bit of a war chest saved up. Whereas in the past it was, if there's enough money to pay the bills this month, I'm okay. Whereas now I've realised that, it's probably a good idea to make sure that you've got access to funds that, will help if,
Yeah.
if it all goes a bit wrong. Because, you think about the impact that it stopped international travel, it stopped people gathering. My business is, you couldn't think of a worse one. I want to get in a room with 100 people and we're all going to huddle up really close. And we're going to travel to do it. So it was a trying time. But, it's like anything else, I haven't got through it. You think, well, okay, it's a lot more resilient than I thought it was. I started doing this full time 20 years ago, and there's been several times where I've been all like, this isn't sustainable. I'm at the seat of my pants now, and somehow through good luck, I seem to always manage to kind of scrape through to the other side and keep on going. And I'm 53 in the next month, so you think it's, I'll probably reach retirement age now quite confidently, having been able to do this for a living. It's a blessed state to.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Joost, you kind of answered it already, but I don't know if you want to add something. What have you kept and what have you been forced to cut out both from your pandemic and pre-pandemic
Yeah, and I
operations?
don't think
have
the
you?
value of the app has come in, because it's a global community. It's not dependent on people meeting. It has been quite successful for me. That people really like it, so that's something that originally it started off as a little side thing, but it's a big part of what I do now. But in terms of, I'm pretty much running it exactly as I did before the pandemic. Now, during it, I had to be a bit creative.
Yeah. And Abiba has a similar question. I don't know if maybe you want to add some nuance to what you already said, but yes, what are some clear demarcations in your life before and after the pandemic with the lockdowns? It says many people, including myself, experience a clear before and after with fuzzy haze and memory loss in the middle.
I know. I don't think I'd be surprised if I haven't had COVID, but I'm not aware that I've had COVID. So I know some people have had that long COVID, and it seems awful from what they describe, these long fatigues and everything else like that. But I was testing regularly. I never got a positive test. Any point, I would get a cold and I would test, and it still wasn't positive. So if I've had it, I didn't know I'd had it. So maybe I got it very mildly, or maybe the vaccine cleaned it out for me, or what. But I haven't suffered with it like that. But I do have a few friends who've had they got it, and then months later they're still suffering from low energy and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I never had any of that.
That's good. I've had it a few times. That I know of. that I tested and that I felt like shit. And then, like, okay, I've got COVID now. And the first time, like, ooh, freaky. But I think I got it really in the beginning in 2020 because both my girlfriend and I, we had this kind of somewhere between a cold and a flu, and it really lingered for a while. It took like a few weeks to get better, and that was kind of like really just before the mainstream message was coming across that this was actually happening, that we were getting a pandemic. And I've had it a few times since that I tested positive, and like the last time was like last year, and like somewhere between a flu and a cold, more closely towards a cold than a flu. I was like, okay. But she was down with like heavy headaches. Like really, she had to stay in bed. So I'm like, yes, that's because I do all the training and you don't.
Well, in the
That's what I said.
UK, there was I think it was Liverpool versus Milan. I think a football game when it kind of really got hold in Italy. And then a lot of the Italian supporters come to this Liverpool game, and my dad was at that game. So my dad was one of the first people I know who got COVID, and it floored him, I mean, full recovery from it, but it floored him. But I think living in a rural area, on my own, it's even when I'm at seminars, I guess I come into contact with a lot of people, but always briefly as you're moving around. So there's one person you demonstrate with. So I don't know if the lifestyle's protected me a little bit. I'm not quite so sure, but I mean, I'd be surprised if I haven't had it. But if I had, I don't know how.
On the other hand, I mean, you train a lot, so your health should be pretty robust anyway to begin with. And I mean, as far as I know, you don't lead this decadent lifestyle of booze and drugs and eating crap all day long. So normally, if in normal circumstances, your immune system should be doing reasonably well, and you should be in good shape, physically speaking.
Yeah, it's
So
got to help,
that
isn't it?
definitely, I mean, on average, should be a help. Now, and talking about that, because we were joking about it before we started recording, that we are both now in the old farts club, because I'm 52, you're almost 53, so we're getting there. How has your training changed? I mean, from not necessarily from the beginning until now, but like let's say the last 5 to 10 years, how have you
Reluctantly,
changed training?
it took me a very long time, an embarrassingly long time, to realize I wasn't 20 anymore. So I'd still be lifting, trying to get personal bests. I'd be on the rowing machine, trying to get faster than I'd ever done 5K on. And then there was that bit where I realized I will never reach that. There's a reason there's not 50-year-old Olympic athletes. There is a point where Father Time catches up with every single one of us. And it was a slow process that my ego was reluctant to accept. But when I did accept it, it's helped massively, because then the overtraining isn't really a thing as much as it was. And the amount of I was getting injured, it's not as much as it was. So my training has shifted a lot more to kind of health based to it, not just that functional side of it as well. So, for example, yesterday, with all the traveling and stuff, I'm feeling a little tired, body's a little bit achy. In the past, I would have gone, I'll just push through. And I would have woken up the next day and I would have been fine. If I'd done that yesterday, I would have woken up today and I'd missed 2 days worth of training because I just couldn't. So yesterday's was a 2-hour walk. That's what training was yesterday, because I'm just going to do something, you know what I mean? I'm going to go for a walk, brisk pace for 2 hours. Today, this morning, I did 45 minutes of heavy cardio and then did a good upper body weight session, because I've got that energy, which I wouldn't have had if I'd trained the way I used to train. So I listen to my body a lot more now. The weight training, I'm not lifting as heavy as I did, but I'm controlling the weight, I think, a lot better. I think my form is better. I'm much smoother in my repetitions. Whenever I finish, I can feel it now in my chest and everything's really sore, but I'm not pushing for those one rep maxes anymore. It's not so much the muscle. I always found it was like the ligaments and tendons would start to get strained. And then, I would have problems with it. So I can't speak for everybody. It's more your field of expertise than mine. But certainly for my own training, I've just The big difference is when I was younger, my body was my enemy. I would fight it in training.
Mm.
Whereas now everything's a negotiation. We try and reach compromise as to what we can realistically do. And I think that's helping me perform better than I would do if I tried to train like I did 10 years ago. It's just different now. I have to stretch a lot more. That's the other thing. Flexibility was just a given when I was young. Whereas now I've realized it disappears unless you keep working at it.
Yeah, I have the exact same thing. I mean, flexibility was really when I started training in my teenage years, I was very stiff. So I did a lot of stretching, and being Belgian and Jean-Claude Van Damme was, getting famous. Obviously, I had to do the splits. So I got to be very flexible. That was always easy. And like the last, let's say 4 to 5 years, it's like, what the hell is going on here? I really have to work at it. I have to warm up, sorry, and do a really good stretching routine, because like high kicks without warm up, that's gone. We're never doing that again anymore, which is maybe a good thing. But yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to stay healthy. And kind of like you, I'm similar. I would say that my body wasn't my enemy, but my body was my slave. I would punish it physically, and it didn't get to complain. It's like, you get to do what I tell you to do, and you've got to shut the hell up, and you're going to work out again. And everything
Yeah.
hurts, don't care, do it anyway. Obey. I'm your master. My body now has switched roles. No, I'm the slave. And it says like, you're not doing that. We're doing this instead. You're doing rehab. You're doing stretching. You're doing recovery. Like today, I had a 7 o'clock appointment, which with a client, which means I have to get up at 5. But I finished class on Monday at 10 o'clock at night. So I get home around 11:15, and then, I just was training for 3 hours. So then, you can't fall asleep right away. So if I get like 4.5, 5 hours of sleep, then from until Tuesday morning, that's a lot. So at my age now, that's like, no, today physically I'm not going to be able to do much without paying a huge price for it. I could force myself, but I'm like, no, that Wednesday it's gonna be even worse. I'm like, I'm not doing it. So I've learned to, like you said, it's like, okay, pace yourself today. Not enough energy, stuff hurts. No, it's going to be rehab. It's going to be stretching and recovery, and see how I feel, and light stuff. And tomorrow I'll go at it again. But like, no, it's just this breaking down of your body, and everybody, when you're young, older athletes, they tell you like, yeah, you're not going to keep on doing that. Take care of your joints, take care of your stabilizer muscles, do the stretching. I'm like, I don't have a problem with mobility. Everything works fine. And I remember thinking that is like, what is he talking about? I don't have to stretch. And then now it's like, oh, okay. That's what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, sleep is a big one as well. Because when I was, even you said about 5 years, 5 years ago, I could get by on 6 hours sleep, no problem at all. And for traveling to teach seminars, it's not unusual to get up at like 3 a.m, drive or fly to wherever I'm teaching, teach solid for a few days, fly back. I would get to bed really late, say 2 a.m. I'd jump out of bed later on that day, Monday, and I'm ready to go. And now I'm not. And I do need that like at least 7.5 hours a night now. I'll tell you what really has helped. I've got one of those little this tracker things that monitors the quality of your sleep. And I found having a figure attached to how well I've slept has helped me. So when it's giving me a score of 50, and I'm feeling I don't think I've got a really hard session in me today, that's not me being lazy. That's me being smart. I'll do something. I'll always do something, because something's always better than nothing. But I'll wait until I'm ready for, like today. I felt ready for a good one today. So I've had a really hard one today, and I'll have two, really intense ones a week. But the rest of them need to be what can I realistically manage in a way that's going to be productive.
Yeah. I've got the watch, the smartwatch, and that kind of measures it. And a few years ago, I found out that I have sleep apnea, so I have to sleep with this. Not a CPAP, it's kind of like a mouthpiece. That is my girlfriend finds that hilarious, because what it does, it pushes my jaw forward so that my tongue can't roll backwards. But when I wake up in the morning, I've got my jaw sticking out a little bit, so she thinks it's hilarious. And when I put it in to go to bed and I say goodnight, I talk like that. So she cracks her up. She thinks it's really funny. Um, and that made a huge difference. Just fatigue wise, I was exhausted the whole freaking time. I would just want to go to. I mean, I'd wake up, I'd go to my first appointment, and it could be like 9 a.m. and I just want to. I mean, just be dead tired, or be 2 or 3 p.m. and I'd been doing just appointments, but light stuff, nothing like physically active. I literally had to, driving home from a client, I had to stop at the side of the road, just take a nap. I was like, this isn't normal. I was like, shit, do I have cancer? What the hell's going on? Turns out sleep apnea. That's a whole lot better now. And all that kind of stuff, it kind of wears down. It just tears you down more and more and more. Eventually, you're like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And it's not supposed to be like that. I mean, if you're healthy, if you don't have those kind of issues, you can train hard. And I still train reasonably hard, but there's a lot of stuff like, um, I go to BJJ class, a lot of fun working with young guys. There's this one guy, I think he's a blue belt or a brown belt, I don't remember. He competes, he does MMA competition, and he's a lot lighter than I am, but he's just a strong young guy. I think he's his late 20s, and then he enjoys grappling with me because if he can toss me around, he can toss somebody around of his own, weight class. So, and we tend to do like anywhere between 5 to 7 5-minute rounds of rolling with 1 minute rest. Uh, I'm still 52. So he does like the second roll he does with me, and then he always waves me over for the last one when I'm dead tired. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna lie on top of you and just be heavy on you and let you do your thing and try to defend. And I can't really submit him well. I can make it very difficult for him to submit me, even though he does manage every now and then. But um, I can't make him tap. He's too good. He's technically too good. My grappling background is very different from BJJ. The rule set is very different. I did some shuto and then some really weird stuff, random stuff, left and right, which was very much self defense oriented. So it's still to this day a lot of stuff when we're rolling in BJJ class or doing stuff. I'm like, "Oh, shit, I'm not allowed to bite him in the neck. I'm not allowed to gouge out his eyes and this and that." Then people get very upset. It's like, yes, but we can do that too. I said, yes, but you're not training that way because in competition that's not allowed. And we've had that talk before. So I say like, I still suck at BJJ compared to those guys, and it's awesome. I'm a white belt. This is cool. I don't have to teach. I don't have to do anything. I just have to show up for class, learn, have fun, have a good workout, and go home. But the first time I went to class after a while, because I had a shoulder injury, I was dead. I mean, I came home, I lay down on the couch, and after like an hour, I got up and I was walking like an old man, and Peggy was just laughing her ass off. She was like, "So, do you have fun in class?" So, and that's the kind of stuff that, still, I mean, it's just like you said, realizing that Father Time wins every time. But Lauren Christensen talked about that many times. But we chatted about it. He was writing books about this and that, and he wrote a book not that long ago about fast hands. And he said that I was surprised that even at my age, when I started working speed again, I got faster and significantly. And it's not like he was slow because I've had a punch. I had Lauren Christensen's fist coming right at my face at high speed. He's not slow at all. I was like, I don't want to see you get even faster. It's poor people that get punched by you. So I'm guessing my point is that even at our age, we can still make progress. It's just not going to be the same as
It does.
before.
And
Does that make
one of
sense?
the things that I like to make a demarcation in my teaching on speed between what I call physical speed and technical speed. So the physical speed, which is basically how fast your muscles can contract, and different people are built differently, and you can improve whatever you've got through training, but at a certain point it starts to diminish. But your efficiency of movement is something that can improve indefinitely. So I would think that now I'm probably, although my body is older than me of 20 years ago, I think my technique is more efficient than was of 20 years ago. So I can still hit things, and I think I'm hitting hard and fast, but I have to do it more through, can't use the physicality to mask any errors in technique. So I feel that that's where I can continually improve as well. And I look at people, we've got people in our clubs who would, I'm in my 50s, but I know people in the 70s who still physically really impress me. Like Peter Constantine, one of my teachers, I mean, that guy's striking power and speed are ridiculous. a lot of it is, just intelligent training over a long period of time, but also it's that working on the technical side as well, which we can theoretically improve as long as we can move effectively.
Yeah, I agree with that. There was something I was talking yesterday to that new student, the karate black belt in my Tai Chi class, and said, look, we're doing an application. So there's three things that will always change, regardless of who's in front of you, how big or tall they are, whatever. Is that it's going to be the timing will be different each time, the distance and the orientation. How are you oriented on him? How is he oriented on you? And then that's where all the nuances are. That's where you're going to have to slightly change the technique. Your parry is going to go a little bit further or a little bit closer, a little bit more this, a little bit more that. Same thing with your counter technique and so on. And it's the kind of experience that you can build throughout many decades of training, where you don't have to work as hard to adjust anymore, but the adjustments have been practiced so many times that kind of stuff happens quasi automatically, if not automatically. And then as a result, you move faster. To the untrained eye, you're just doing less. I call it constructive laziness. Is that we want to do the least amount of work possible, the least amount of movement possible, so that there's no bringing back the fist again to hit a second time. So if my fist's over here, I'm not going to bring it back to strike. I'll do something with my other hand, which is already lined up to do that, by the way. And that's kind of the goal, I think, like you mentioned, the technical proficiency and how clean your techniques are, that there's no superfluous movements, but there's also no wasted time, because you know exactly okay, you've trained yourself to know this is how far I will go with this movement before I have to change direction and do another one. So there's no surplus, there's no weight, even if it's a fraction of a second of a delay.
Yeah,
But
100%.
they add up. And if you combine that with good timing, good positioning, good work, good orientation, judging the distance correctly and so on, good tactics, and like tactics and strategy is something that your understanding increases with experience if you train correctly. And if all those different elements start, interconnecting much, much better than, like, say, 20 years ago, then you get, like you mentioned, guys who are in their 70s is like, what the hell just happened? He punched that guy all the way across the room. I've seen Peter strike, so, not in person, but I've seen the videos. Like
It's frightening when he hits it. It's incredible.
It would be painful.
I think I'm probably misquoting slightly, but I think it's something I heard Bill Wallace say once, and it was saying, he's older, and he says, but I'm sneakier. And he goes, and nothing takes the place of experience. And I like that line, nothing takes the place of experience. So if I've been training 41 years. So although the me of 20 years ago the me 20 years ago was fitter than the me now, this me has 20 years more experience than that guy. And I think that more than makes up for the physical shortfall at the moment, so when I say it's just,
I've said that as well to students. As look, my old ass would beat up my younger ass right now, and not because I'm in better shape or anything, just because I know what that idiot did wrong, because I corrected it. So I'm pretty confident that I could take him on, because I know exactly where all his weaknesses are and what he needed to learn that I learned over the years and that he hadn't learned just yet. And it's kind of a question to you. There's a lot of stuff that you've put out publicly, and so have I. I've been writing my blog's about 20 years old, hundreds and hundreds of articles, truckloads of videos. There's some of the stuff that I look at when I was younger that I was like, I shouldn't have said that way, or maybe I shouldn't have written that way, or maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut. I don't like to delete that kind of stuff, because it kind of feels like falsifying. Okay, it's okay to show the process, I think, the evolution of somebody. And it's okay to admit, like, okay, I was wrong there, or actually I changed my mind. Do you also get that?
Oh, yeah,
Like when you look at some of your older works, like,
I got it this week.
Shouldn't have done that differently.
My daughter spotted one of my books on my girlfriend's shelf. So I got the book that I'd written 24 years ago, and I haven't picked it up in maybe a decade to look through. So once I've got over, but firstly, that's not you. I goes, that is me. That's me. 24 years ago. It look a bit different. But the quality of everything I was saying, I was happy with, but the way I put it across, I was. I could have put it across much more effectively now. And there's certain, I did a YouTube video about things I've changed my mind about. So as you get exposed to new information and stuff. So obvious one that leaps to mind is we used to have a Wednesday night heavy contact training session, me and a few of the other black belts, and it's great, and this, it toughens you up and you get to really test it. And then I look back and I think it was fun, but we now know that getting blows to the head is not good for you. Every single one of them, they used to think it was a cumulative effect. I remember the bad heads going to work the next day, so that wasn't smart. Did it really, learn anything from that? I could have not really. People you learn to take a punch. I think, well, no, because a bare fist to the head feels very different to a glove fist to the head. You know what I mean? It was different. So, I mean, now I don't do any heavy contact head sparring at all. But back then I thought it was mandatory. So, there's one. So I think there's lots of stuff. And I'm like you, it's all there. Every article I've ever written's online, and I've not changed any of it. I don't delete any videos, anything I've said is out there. And then hopefully for prosperity, people can see how that thinking, or more importantly, I think the way in which I express it. But I've been through it my whole life. I'm sure you must be the same. Like, the 30-year-old me look at 20-year-old me and went, that guy was an idiot. And then 40-year-old me looks at 30-year-old me and that guy was an idiot. And I'm still doing it. So I'm not fine. Well, 60-year-old me will go, you had no idea what he was talking about. So at least I've learned that I know that's coming.
The one thing that I think I have learned better, that I think I've gotten better at, and I hope I'm not being arrogant here, and that I'm off, but let me put it differently. I have really tried to get better at this, is to talk less about things I don't know much about and more about things I know more about. Doesn't mean I'm right, but it only means that I try to focus more on stuff that I actually have, some knowledge on, some experience with, and so on. And if I'm straying from that principle, then I like to keep it more neutral, and I'll just say, like, okay, and I'll go bird's eye view and not really dig down into details that I just haven't studied yet or haven't researched. And I think that's a good way to not say doing the stupid stuff anymore. Is just stick more to things that you know. And I try to do that. Doesn't mean you can't have an opinion. That's very often, especially this day and age, there's a lot of like, you can't say that, or you can't say this, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, no, you can say whatever you want. It would be better if you say something that is informed. It can happen that it's not wrong to say a stupid opinion. And also, it could be that just you thought you were informed and you did the research. Turns out that you used the wrong sources, or it was incomplete, and so on. I can't tell you how many times that, like when it comes to strength training, conditioning, fitness, health, and so on, that's something that is basically sacrosanct for decades. All of a sudden turns out that it's not true. We actually found out it's different. It's something else. New science says that was wrong. We made a mistake, or it's not wrong, but it's not the only story. There's actually a whole new part that we need to add to that. Like, oh, okay. Well, I've been saying this for 20 years. Turns out that I have to adjust, and that's all fine. I mean, I think that's fine. And the goal should be to keep on studying.
Well, I think that's a healthy approach. We all do that. We operate with the best information we've got at that point. And I think the problem is if new information comes in, I see this a lot in the traditional martial arts world, of course. If new information comes in that might suggest there's a better way to do this, to me, the healthy view is to go, okay, doesn't mean everything we've done at this point was a complete waste of time. It was right for what we knew, but now we can make it better. New training methods, new ways of doing stuff, new equipment, new technologies, new studies. I'm always open to that. And it was a point you made earlier. I mean, I think the tradition of karate has always been that. Like Funakoshi makes a point that he says, the karate that's been taught today is a long way indeed from the karate I learned as a child in Okinawa. It should continuously change and adapt. But I mean, some of the times it amazes me. The for example, when I think it was my second book, there's a photograph of me hitting a focus pad in that book when I'm explaining about various types of impact equipment. And there was traditional karateka who were telling me, but we're karateka, we use makiwaras, we don't use focus meats. Boxers use focus meats. And to my mind, the only reason that the traditional guys didn't use focus meats is they didn't have focus meats. If they had focus meats, they would have used them. So in 100 years' time, we'll be talking about traditional focus meat drills, hopefully, you know what I mean? But as the technology improves, you've got to adapt what's there. Otherwise, it's stagnation, right? Or regression.
I mean, but I often talk when I talk to people about that when they're really, very, very traditional and like, no, you can't change anything. And I was like that when I was really young. It's just, my late teens, early 20s. I was like, no, we have to preserve this as is and keep going that way. I've come to realize that a really good analogy is looking at the military. Look at what armies have been doing for years on. It's constantly adapting to the battlefield, to changing tactics and technologies. I mean, Roman soldiers, the way they trained, current military doesn't train like that at all. There's principles that will still apply, of strategy and tactics and how to use the terrain and so on. That still applies. But as technology has advanced radically in the last 2,000 years, they train differently. And they use modern training methods. They use virtual reality. They use, the glasses and everything, the immersion and the latest basically scientific methods of stress inoculation. They use all that. They didn't stay stuck in what did that 100 years ago. Let's still do it now. I mean, a good example of that in the First World War, if I'm not mistaken, there were cavalry charges on tanks.
No.
Yeah, that didn't go well. But the military leaders of that time came from an era in which cavalry charges, that was how it was done. Decades and 100 years before them, and that's what they learned, so that's what they did. Yeah, it didn't work at all. So why would you not then take that example as a lesson for yourself, or like adjust whatever you learn that is traditional and see how it can be relevant today? Like we have a technique in that you saw, draw the bow to shoot the tiger. And it's typically shown against an attack that I've talked about this before. So apologies to the people who've heard this before. It's typically shown against double-handed strike that was apparently very popular in certain Chinese styles back in the day. And I have learned that strike in the old hardstyle kung fu that I did. We did it there too. Here's the thing. I've never, ever seen anybody hit like that, ever, at all. Now, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It only means that, and I must have seen hundreds of thousands of videos of real fights in all over the world, in Asia, in Europe, in the US, whatever, because I've been researching that for many, many years. You don't see it anymore. So that specific defense against that technique is not really relevant anymore. However, we can modernize it with some slight adaptations. Like it still works against this kind of attack, which is very common. The big haymaker, still very common. Okay, we can adapt the technique to use it to defend against that, and it works really well. Now, it becomes interesting when you can then have both, which for us we call that true transmission. Is you transmit the art correctly from teacher to student and so on, so it keeps going throughout the ages, and nothing is lost. You can still maintain, like, look, this is where it came from. Here's why we changed that. Because we don't see that anymore. If it ever comes back for whatever reason, here's a technique that you can use against that. But for now, this is how we're going to apply it. And that you add to the knowledge base, as opposed to cutting something out, plopping something else in, and then you lose whatever you cut out. Okay, you can cut it up, but set it aside in a different folder on your hard drive, and like, this is some of the stuff we cut out, and this is the reason why. And you leave a footnote in that technique, like, okay, please look up in that file the origins of this technique and why it is called draw the bow to shoot a tiger and what the purpose is. Nobody loses, everybody wins. Yeah, people get really upset about it. You shouldn't do that, I'm like, okay, do an antiquated technique then. And you can practice that. It's fine. I have no issue with that, but why not make it relevant to today?
That's what they would have done. And I think why, from experiencing the world I operate, some people think it's disrespectful. So these great masters of all came up with this system. And are you saying you know more? Are you saying you can do it better? And the analogy I always use is it's like physics. So Newton had his physics, and modern physics has moved on beyond that. They look back at Newton and say he wasn't quite right on certain things. We can improve it, but we wouldn't be where we were if it wasn't for Newton. Nobody looks back at Newton and went, he was an idiot. They all go, he was a great thinker. He was one of the pioneers of modern physics. But that doesn't mean we can't move on, because we have what he gave us. So we're not rejecting it. We're just building on it. And that's kind of the view I do. I don't think I'm in any way disrespecting those who came before. I'm trying to continue their mission. They wanted their art to be the best they could make it. So thanks to them and all the hard work they put in, I'm not starting from scratch. I'm well along the way because of what they've passed on. But if I can move it on an inch, I think it's my responsibility. And indeed, it honors them. If I try and do that for them, try and make the art they put so much time and effort into, trying to make it relevant to the times that we're in, I don't think it's disrespectful. The other analogy I often run with, if you think of, they talk about the roots, the roots of our art. I said, what's the point of roots? Look at a tree. What's roots for? And it's stability and encourage new growth. If it's not encouraging new growth, those roots are dead. That tree's dead. You know what I mean? How you see that it's still alive is you see the new branches coming off. To me, that's what the roots of my art are for, to feed that future growth.
Yeah. And at the same time, I want to add that there's this funny meme that I have somewhere saved, and you see like plastic container of tennis balls, and it says, with this new way of storing them, you can store many more, and they're just cut in half and then folded together, so that like double the amount can fit into the container. And the idea is like, not every new idea is progress. Not all progress is positive. And that's kind of the tension that I think is always there as well, when you're like, okay, so we innovation is part of it, because as humanity, society, and so on, as things change, the arts needs to change along with them. But that doesn't mean that by default
100%.
every change is good. And that's what I wanted to ask you. And it's when you look at some of the, again, we're in our 50s, so we're old dormers now. But you've got, I remember when I started, when you started, 20s, 30s, and so on, there was not a lot of internet going on, but we did our thing. And when you see a lot of new instructors now in their 20s and 30s, sometimes I'm like, yes, this is innovative, but I don't think it's progress. I don't think, I mean, there's like, and is this like I'm saying more and more like the meme of Clint Eastwood in the movie Gran Torino, sitting in his yard, like, get off my lawn, just becoming the grumpy old man. I always joke like, I'm the grumpy old man now. What do you do when you see that kind of stuff? I try to look for the positive. I'm like, okay, I disagree, but here's try to steel man whatever that person is saying or explains. Like, okay, what can I draw out of this? But sometimes it's like,
Yeah,
I
it's
just
a bad
flat out
idea.
disagree.
Yeah.
I think this is not that it couldn't work, because anything can work. It just depends on too many circumstances. But it doesn't mean it's a good idea to make this like the main thing that you do.
Well,
So how do you feel about that?
the process I try to encourage is that there's a shu hari process that's supposed to be central to traditional Japanese martial arts, which means copy, diverge, transcend. And that's the order we're supposed to learn things. So you copy something first because you've got no experience, no knowledge. You have to copy what your instructor gives you. At a certain point, you start to diverge a little bit because you've got your own experiences and you're you and you're not your instructor. And at a certain point, that divergence becomes something that's new. You know what I mean? So it's transcend. So if a white belt says, I have an innovation, it's invariably going to be a bad innovation because they're not far enough along that process there to know what they're talking about. Now, if they are training in other arts, and then they come to the karate, they may have an insight abroad. But I think you need to gain that experience before you can do it. And there's sometimes this idea that you spend 20 years on each or something like that. And I don't think that's true. I think that in my development, there's certain innovations that I've made that I think are solid, but there's also things in my training where I'm still at the copy stage. I don't know enough about it to start playing with it yet, depending on what I'm doing. So, but for me, if we stick to that process, we avoid that copy, which would lead to stagnation, and it will encourage the growth through the correct one. So for me, if I see things like that, then one, if no one's asked my opinion on it, I'll normally just keep my mouth shut. If I can't help myself, and that sometimes happens, I'll normally, try and do it in a way that encourages them to question it. So have you considered, or, my thought would be that, you know what I mean? Is it just to see if it goes. But I'd like to think, I don't know if this is true, but I'd like to think that over time, the stronger innovations will be the ones that will survive, whereas the weaker ones will get weeded out. So it's sometimes you can see them and it's okay. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I love it when I see the alternative, though. When I see somebody do something, I would never have thought to drill it that way or do it that way, but I'm massively impressed by it. And what delights me is I see quite a lot of that. People doing things that I really like it. Maybe I'm selective about who I follow on social media.
Well, for me, the issue is that, a lot of my students and sometimes patrons, they enjoy sending me those kind of videos. And there's a few of those people who like to send me the crappiest stuff. Like that there's a lot of stuff that coming like out of India or something, where it's two guys clearly not having trained a lot, like maybe being like yellow belt. And then, the whole meme that's going on around now is they show a technique and then they wag their finger. No, don't do this instead. And it gets the green check mark. And then it's like, they just show the most, inefficient, really unrealistic stuff ever. And I'm like, it's a joke, right? It's a joke. And then you look at his channel. No, it's all a joke. He does a bunch of this stuff and he thinks he's doing well. On the other hand, I remember being young like that and looking at some of the, older practitioners and teachers and so on that were actually quite good. And I thought like, yeah, okay, that's antiquated stuff. Really, you need to get with the times. So I'm always wary of when I look at younger instructors and people coming up on YouTube or what have you, that we remember you used to look at those guys that were older and thought maybe you had a better idea. So they're looking at you the exact same way. Maybe it's like that old guy from Belgium over there. He's had his time, but that time is gone. It's time to do what we're doing right now. Which is fine, by the way, which is fine. It's just, I remember talking to some instructors when I was younger who I think it was legitimate for me to think like, okay, you're full of shit. Because yes, they'd been training for a long time, but they clearly did not have the level that they thought they had. And they were parroting things that they heard maybe like when they were a white belt way back in the day that were wrong then and are wrong now. Because there is stuff out there that is wrong as well. And I always, remember those kind of things. And even when I was young, thinking like, I don't want to end up like that. I don't want to be the guy who's just talking about some stuff that he's been saying for the last, 40 years and saying the exact same stuff. But then on the other hand, again, it's always either or. On the other hand, but some things are timeless. We just discussed that a little while ago. It's like some stuff, some principles will be good 1,000 years ago and 1,000 years from now. It's so navigating all that. That kind of brings me to my question: how do you deal with that doubt? It's like you're working on something, on a technique, you're writing something, whatever. Like, is this actually correct, or am I just way off here? Or will this stand? Am I going to be in agreement with myself maybe 10 years from now, or is this one of those things where I'll say like, I was so
I
stupid?
tend not to share anything. There's lots of works in progress, but I tend not to share anything publicly, either social media or online, until it's been worked a lot and I'm quite convinced. So, and this is where my fellow instructors at my club are a great help, and my students are a great help, because they're quite used to me going, let's try this. Let's see how this works out. And sometimes the feedback is, oh, I love that. That's great. We should do more of that. And other times, now I'll tell you why I don't like it. So I've got people I trust who get it, whose opinions I can chair, and then, you know, it gets workshop. It's a standard joke in the club. They say, yeah, Ian gets all the credit for it, but we come up with half of the good ideas. And there's an element of truth to that. You know, they are the workshop to make sure that, you know, is this something I haven't thought about? Because there's been a lot of times where they've gone, have you thought about that? Oh, that's the missing ingredient. Well, that's what it needs. But your earlier point as well, I hope there's a point where everything I'm saying is people just go,
Yep.
self-evident. Ian's got nothing to say of any value anymore. You know what I mean? The people who are going to get it have fully got it. The people who are never going to get it don't care. You know, and I just reached that point where, okay, I'm done. Pass that baton on. I'm here if you need me, but it's yours now. You go. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of hoping it gets to that point, you know, then I've been an effective link in that chain. I wouldn't want to be sitting there on my deathbed thinking that there was a lot more work for me to do. And certainly with that karate community, stuff I know that when I was teaching it 25 years ago, which to a lot of people seemed revolutionary at the time, there's now an exponentially large number of people who just go, it's self-evident. You know what I mean? We're all trained that way now within that group in which I operate. So I hope I'm completely irrelevant one day. That will be a mark of success.
It's one of those things that I think you should strive for as an instructor, is that, you know, your students take further than you can, so that you give them as much as you can, and then like, okay, guys, that's it. You've got everything that I could give you. Keep going. And it's tricky. When do you think, can you realize, okay, they're now at this point, so this is where I back off and let them go off on their own? That's kind of tricky. I really don't know how you can quantify that, other than it's going to be very individual. Every student's going to be different. And a lot of it will also be that, I think, at what stage of your life are you at right now? So we're now in our early 50s, but what in 10 years? What in 15 years? Because I know right now, I've been teaching two classes a week for many, many decades. It used to be 3, and then I moved, so that was reduced to 2, but for at least the last, you know, almost 30 years, standard 2 classes a week that I teach. And I found myself for the first time in all those many years, a few weeks ago, that I could only teach 1 a week, because I had reserved the dojo at the place that we're going to, but all of a sudden, you know, for a variety of reasons, it had to go to another group. And I was like, oh, okay, now I've got only 1 class. That's bizarre. And then I got to thinking, it's like, do I want to teach a second class again? And it took me a while to really, you know, come to a decision like, yes, I do. Because at our age, it's like, okay, it's a big commitment of time. There's other stuff that I want to do as well. I've been doing it for so long that it's just a habit, but then all of a sudden it's gone. It's like, hold on, do I really want to go back to that? Or do I want to do something else with my time? Or do I want to teach a different class? Or what do I want to do? Because the opportunity presents itself. And that brings me to my point, is when, as we get older, our priorities change. So I still enjoy training and teaching. I'm a personal trainer, so I teach people one-on-one every day. I love doing that still, even it's 30 years now next month that I've been working full-time as a personal trainer. I still love my job. It's still great. But there's other stuff as well that happens in life. Like, you know, we were talking about that before I started recording. My daughter is, you know, living by herself now. She's got an apartment. Next year, my son will probably do the same thing. So they're out of the house. They're calm. They're doing their own thing. I hopefully will see them come back every now and then to visit us. But life changes, and then your priorities, I think, change as well. So how's that for you? Have you kind of feel like this shift in priorities coming, or is it still like very
At
much
the
the same
moment,
as
it's pretty
before?
much the same. You know, I've read the traveling has definitely got harder. You know, at one point it was a non-issue. You know, like I say, the lack of sleep, all the traveling was fine. Now it does take its toll. But as soon as I'm on the floor with those people, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Same with in Club Town. You know, I can be feeling tired and I might not be feeling it. As soon as I'm there, I'm really happy. But I'm aware that I think in the next 7 or 8 years, I start to move towards 60. My plan is to taper down what I'm doing. So I don't think I'll ever stop, because I enjoy it too much. but I won't do it as regularly as I do it for two reasons. One is I don't think that that people will, there'll be other people coming up that'll be doing this kind of stuff and will be doing it every week as well, if not better than me. So maybe the demand will start to diminish a little. The other thing is I'll be getting a bit older and I'll want a little bit more kind of downtime, time with the family, all that kind of stuff. So I can see that happening. But at the moment, the enthusiasm, what's the word? Yeah, the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak.
Yeah, I mean, for me to say, I still teach. I love teaching. I don't see myself stopping from my classes. The only question was like, okay, do I really need to teach a second class a week, or can I go do another class and learn something myself, something new? Because that would be interesting as well. I mean, in both cases, the evening is reserved for training. But it's going to be me teaching and then training along with the guys, or me not teaching anything and going to a class and learning everything, and I can just enjoy myself that way. So either way, I'm not moving away from martial arts or training. It would just be different. And then I decided like, no, once a week for a regular class is not all that much. I think 3 times is best, but I don't want to commit to 3 days a week anymore because I just don't have that time. I'm working evenings as well. So I think, yeah, twice a week is actually a fairly good compromise. So, I just got the email today, so I'll reserve the dojo there as well, so we can have a second class in the week. But it was bizarre after all these many years of really passionate training in the arts, all of a sudden finding myself wondering like, hold on, do you really want to do this? Do you want to do something else? It was very bizarre, especially as a teacher. I've been teaching and well, I was teaching the warm-ups in my class when I was like 16 or something. Teacher would come a little bit later. I would do the warm-up. And then a few years later, I was teaching the first hour. And then a few years later, I was teaching, one day and then 2 days. And he said, okay, now the school's yours. You can take it over, which he hadn't prepared me for that. I wasn't ready for that. I'm like, well, hold on. Wait, I get this responsibility now. But who told me that this is going to happen? So, and for doing that for 30 plus years, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that's bizarre. That's bizarre. And especially because I mean, I'm sure it's the same with you, and we'll get to that in the Patreon questions, which we should get to, I guess. I have many other things I'm passionate about that I don't talk about publicly. No, it's not a big secret. It's just that nobody cares because everybody knows me from my martial arts, self-defense stuff, and the podcast, but not from that I, for instance, I have a pretty substantial comic book collection that I've had since I was a very young boy. And I've got a bunch of other stuff that nobody has a clue about that I really enjoy as well. So, is there stuff that you have that you're like, okay, I'm looking forward to being retired and spending more time
I
on
mean,
whatever that
there
is?
definitely are things that we've gone along those lines. I mean, the martial arts has been such a big, all-consuming thing for me, and most of my friends are martial artists as well. So that's the main one. But for example, like as soon as we finish this, I'm getting out on the motorbike and I'm off through the Cumbrian Fells again on the bike. So having more time to just get on two wheels and go wherever my nose takes me, wherever I feel like going. That's something I would like more time to do. And I can see myself as I get older and not teaching as much. That's something I'll definitely do a lot more of. Yeah, I'm heading in that direction for a week. And, again,
Nice.
like you, I do like reading. I really enjoy. I don't get enough time to read as I would like. So lots of things. The main thing as well for me is I still have young kids. So as they get older and I get older, one thing I'm really looking forward to is, yeah, Dad's just always there. You know what I mean? So that, yeah, getting to spend a lot more time with them.
Yeah. I'm very much enjoying because my kids are in their 20s now. It's just that we get to have adult conversations and they push back on a lot of all the stuff that I say. And that's fine. I mean, it's great that's what it's supposed to be. And we just have a wonderful time, just, laughing and joking and ribbing each other a little bit. And it's just really wonderful dynamic is now, has been established for a while now, is that when I know when they get here, it's like, it's fine. And I'm like, guys, I mean, you did everything I asked for growing up. I never had to come get you at the police station, or the police never knocked on my door. You always succeeded in school. Never any issues on in that front. You did your college, you got your degree. My boys got one more year left, but so far everything is fine as well.
Yeah.
What more can you ask as a parent? So when they come over, I'm like, you want to hang out? You don't want to hang out? You want to go to your room and watch, something on a movie on your laptop? I don't care. You do whatever you want to do. We're here. It would be nice if you talk to us a little bit, but if you don't feel like it, it's fine. And I found that works best, so that they actually
Yeah.
want to come over and talk to us, and the really good food that my girlfriend can make, that also helps. But I'm very much
Yeah.
looking forward to more of that. Just you know what it's like if you have kids, you always worry, no matter how old they get. But it's different in my experience, when they become an adult. It's like, okay, my boy just went to the Czech Republic with 2 of his friends. Like, okay. I mean, when I was was his age, I wouldn't have done that. I mean, when I was 22, I wasn't going off by myself. I was competing and going off with a delegation, with the national team, but I was not going by myself to some former Eastern Bloc country or something. So they live a very different life, and it's just fun to see, your kids grow up, like you mentioned, and then just spending time together.
Yeah. Some more of that, you know what I mean, as it starts to ease off.
Yeah. All right. I think we got to head on over to the Patreon section. Where can people reach you, Ian?
IainAbernethy.com. So it's a Scottish spelling of Ian, Iain, and Abernethy, not Nathy, not the American spelling, the proper one.
Okay, and I'll add that to the show notes. So for the folks who are new to the podcast, you go to wimsblog.com. So WIMS blog.com /, and you add in the number of the podcast episode, and that brings you to the show notes page, and any link will be there. And before we go, we wrap this part up. And anything you're working on in particular that people
Not
can
really
look
in
forward to?
particular. The whole thing I would
Any
encourage,
articles,
if people
videos?
like what I do, the app would be the thing to check out. So you can get that from the Play Store, Google Play, or the App Store. I think we're fast approaching 2,000 hours of footage in there now. I update it every single week, so there's a crazy amount of
Nice.
content. So if people like it and want to be able to see a lot of it, that would be, and I'm very proud of that, because it's a big resource, which is getting ever bigger.
Yeah, I saw online Tai Chi Chuan during the lockdown, and I think we're at over 200 videos right now. So
Yeah, that's separate as well,
2000,
not separate videos.
I've
Yeah,
got a way to go.
it's technologically, it's a problem.
Okay, well, we're gonna head on over to the bonus section on Patreon. Folks, if you enjoy this, the podcast and all the other stuff that I do, join me on Patreon. There's we're in our 7th year now, if I'm not mistaken, of content. There's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos, similar to like what Ian just said, of just unique content you can't get anywhere else. And you get to listen to the second part of the interview that I'm doing with Ian now, where he has some interesting questions coming from my patrons. I've got one that I think might be the best one that anybody ever asked. So we're gonna head on over. The link to the bonus part with Ian will be on the show notes as well. So that's it. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.